Hello, welcome to chapter number 2. In this chapter, we are going to learn a little bit about the MySQL Workbench and other development tools. Okay, so in the last chapter, we looked at some of the SQL statements that you can use to work with the data in a relational database. But before you can start learning about the details of this coding or coding these statements, you need to learn how to use MySQL Workbench, okay, and also to enter and execute SQL statements. Okay, we are also going to learn a bit about the command line client and also about the MySQL reference manual. Okay, so once we have that information and the software is ready on our systems, we can then proceed with actually learning about the statements and the syntax and all the various possibilities of MySQL. Some of the things that you're going to be seeing in this chapter are how to start and stop MySQL database server from your MySQL Workbench. Use MySQL Workbench to do any of the following, like create a new database connection, navigate through the objects of a database, view the columns definition, view the data for a table, edit the column definition for a table. So a whole bunch of different options that MySQL Workbench gives you. We're going to go over some of them. Use MySQL Workbench to enter, run, open, and save SQL statements and scripts. So we learn how to use scripts. Use the MySQL reference manual to look up information about SQL statements. So there's a website, the MySQL reference manual website, and it is a super comprehensive information for all things related to MySQL. So we'll take a look at that website as well and how it can be used. Use MySQL Monitor to run an SQL statement. So that's the last bit of this chapter. A couple of things that are not listed here we are also going to do is that I have posted videos inside this video itself, where it shows how to install MySQL Server and the Workbench on your computer. So we'll do that as well. We'll also install or run the scripts that come with the textbook that will give you access to the databases which the textbook will be referencing throughout. So that's also in this chapter. In terms of knowledge objectives, there's only one, which is to briefly be able to describe the functions of each of these client tools: the MySQL Monitor, MySQL Workbench, and the MySQL Reference Manual. We'll take a look at all these things in the following slides. So let's get started. For this course, you're going to need two pieces of software. The first one is the MySQL Server, and the second one is MySQL Workbench. In the first chapter, you saw how server and client works, the client-server architecture works. And in this chapter, you're going to install the server and the client. But for our purposes, we're going to actually be installing both the server and the client on the same computer. Okay, which also means that there is not really going to be a need for the network. Okay, so in the slide that is coming up, you're going to see how those two pieces of software are installed on a Windows computer, and I would recommend you guys to follow along with that video and just downloading the software required and installing them. Okay. Hi. In this video, we're going to see how do you install MySQL Server and also MySQL Workbench. So all you need is a Windows computer. You can do the same thing in Mac or Linux as well, but I'm going to be using Windows for this demonstration. So go ahead and you want to search for MySQL Community Server. And the first link is what we want. In here, we're just going to say accept, and I'm doing this on September 2021, so if you are doing it afterwards, so things might be a little bit different, but should be something similar. Next, you want to go to download page, click on that and select this big 450 megabytes downloader. So I'm just gonna click that. Once you do that, it'll ask you click on this node thanks, just start my download button. If you do sign up, it just sends you a lot of unwanted, I find the emails to be not necessary. So I'm just gonna wait for this to end, the download, and once it finishes, we're gonna open it up and proceed with the installation. The installation is pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of things that we want to make sure. Whenever you see this user account control, you're gonna have to hit yes, and it's just allowing Oracle to make changes to your computer. So this is the second one. So I'm gonna hit yes, and this is the installer loading up. Now I'm gonna just select developer default. That's gonna make our installation process pretty simple, and we're gonna hit next. You can do custom, but I'm just gonna hit the developer. That's gonna be sufficient for our purposes. These things are a couple of things that is gonna stick if you do not have Python or if you do not have Visual Studio. It's not necessary, so I'm just gonna hit next. It doesn't matter if we have these things or not, so just this is not significant, so I'm just gonna hit next and click on yes. Now this is gonna take a little bit of time, so I'm just gonna hit execute and then pause the recording and then come back later on when it's all finished. I'd say this might take a good 5 to 10 minutes depending upon your computer. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pause this recording for now and come back to it in a bit. All right, cool. So the setup has finished. It took about 10 minutes. All right, I'm gonna hit next. The big part is done, so that's good. And okay, so here, once you click next, it'll show up ready to configure 3 things: server, router, and examples. The first step is going to be to configure the server. So when you hit next, it's just select the development computer. Most of the things that we're doing is basically the default setup, so which is great. Hit next and use the strong password. Just make sure you take the recommended setting here. Hitting next. Again, now this is important. Make sure you remember the password you use. I'm going to use a weak password. Actually, no. I'm just going to use a memorable password, I should say. I'm just going to use the word password as my password. So I do recommend using this for learning purposes. So just go ahead and type a simple password. You don't want to be in a situation you can't remember the password. So if you go with this, you at least know that you're following along. So I'm just going to use password for root. Here, configure MySQL as Windows servers. That's fine. This is all good. This is fine. Hitting next, and these are all the configuration steps. Should not take that long. I'm gonna hit execute. Just goes real quick, and then hit finish. So now the first one is done. We are not going to be using the router that much, so I'm just gonna hit do not check this and just hit finish. That's done. And then the last step is to sample an example. So it's just going to install a few things to some databases to the actual server. Now here you need to type your password that you earlier inputted. So I'm just going to say password because that was my password, and I'm going to hit check, and that should come back as green, all that, the checkbox and all that, the check mark. Hitting next, and the last, I believe this is the last step. So there we go, it's all done. I'm going to hit finish and it's all complete. So hitting next, this kind of thing will come up where you don't really need the shell, even though it is installed right now, but you can leave this one checked, the MySQL Workbench after setup. I'm going to hit finish, and what that'll do is it should just open up MySQL Workbench like this. Okay, I can close my browser. I don't need that anymore. You can also delete the installer that you had downloaded. That was like 450 MB. And now you can see this is your MySQL Workbench. This is where you'll be doing all your work for this course. And you can click on this local instance MySQL 80. Now this is the actual database server that we had installed earlier and configured as well. So it will ask you the password, and I'm going to provide the password, and I'm going to say save the password in the vault so that it doesn't ask me over and over again. Hit OK. There we go. So now you can see all this stuff, and I'm just gonna hit this button on the right side to get rid of that. And I'm going to go to server status. It should say server running, and if I go to schemas at the bottom here, you should be able to see these databases here. And okay, so that's how you install the MySQL database server as well as the workstation. All right, perfect. So that's the end of this. And in the next video, you're going to see how do you actually add the files that come with the textbook into the database. Hopefully your installation was successful and you found this screen of MySQL Workbench where you had to enter the password. If you did, then you're ready to move on to the next step. Okay, cool. So hopefully you guys finished the installation, and now we're going to take a few steps next. We're going to install the databases that come with the textbook, and we're going to do some simple actions in the MySQL Workbench software. Okay, so let's open up MySQL Workbench. I'm going to, you may have to go to the start menu and open this MySQL Workbench software. Now, you can see that when you this is the home page, okay, and here on the left side you have 3 tabs. We are going to be mainly working with this connections tab, but there's also this models tab which kind of allows you to see various models. Models would mean maybe an entire schema which may contain multiple tables. That's not really important right now. And there's also this migration tool which allows you to kind of move your data from one place to another place, one server to another server. So we're going to be mainly focused on the first tab where we have we're going to have the connections, MySQL connections. Now, remember, MySQL Workbench is a client, right? And you can have several servers connected to one client, just like how you can use your web browsers to connect to multiple websites. Each website is a server too, right? So similarly, when you're doing with working with MySQL Workbench, you can have multiple MySQL connections here. We only have one And even with that connection, you can actually right click on this connection and say edit connection. And if you do that, you can change the name of the connection. This is like your friendly name to, kind of a nickname so you can give that whatever you like. You can set your username, your host name. So host name in this case is localhost, which just means that it is hosted locally. So the server is actually your own computer. It's the same computer that you have the client on as well. So that's what localhost means. And 3306 is just the default port. If you hit the test connection button, it should say successfully made the MySQL connection. And I'm just gonna hit OK. So just know that that's you can right click and do the edit connection there. Now there are a few other things that allows you to do as well, but those are really not that important right now. For example, this copy JDBC connection string to clipboard. If you do that, allow you to copy the connection details that is required to connect your Java application to your MySQL database server that is connect like this one right here. So that's pretty interesting and cool. So I'm just gonna open it. To open it, you just click it once and it should just fire up like that. And now you are connected to that local MySQL server. Okay. Next, you see here there, if you click on this administration tab, you can see there's a bunch of management tabs here. I'm just going to show you a couple from here. If you click on this server status, you can see that the server is running and a few more details where the server is stored and all that. You can also, if you click on this startup and slash shutdown, you can stop the server. You won't have to, but you could if you want. If you're wondering if there's some errors in your server and you're wondering why, one of the troubleshooting steps is that you can stop the server and then start the server again. Okay. So that's how you may interact with the administration tab. And then if you go back to your schema tabs, this is all the different database schemas that are present in the data in your in the database right now. And these were installed by default, so you should have them as well. Okay, and what I'm going to do now, though, I'm going to run the script that came with the textbook, and you can get the script from your instructor. And the script, I have it on my desktop here. So let me just quickly show you here. So the folder name is db setup. And if you open db setup, you should have these 4 script files. They should end with .sql. So these are SQL text files. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my MySQL Workbench, and it's really simple. All you have to do is go File and open SQL script, and then you just want to browse to this particular setup and click this create databases script and just execute this guy. Okay, so if you hit open, it should open up and this is actually a database SQL script, so it contains a lot of things. You don't need to really modify it, but it's kind of neat to look at it. So here is a couple of these are some comments here. These are some comments, and here's a couple of lines for creating the database, more lines for creating tables, and then these are the lines to insert the data into the tables. So you're going to learn all these things as you progress in this course, but for now I'm just going to actually execute this whole script file by clicking on this lightning bolt icon. If you click on this, everything should just be execute automatically, and you should see the results of your execution here. So here, the first one here, there is a warning sign, but that just means that there's nothing to worry about here, because this command says that drop database if exists, and in our case the database does not exist, so it could not find the database, hence the warning sign, but nothing to worry. Everything else is basically green. There's a couple of errors here, similar problem. If you try to execute this again, in that case, this will not be yellow or warning. Since we are doing this for the first time, it comes up like that. Not a big deal. It's totally fine. That's to be expected. And we are done. Now, after you have finished executing that script, you can close the script like this, just hitting the cross. And here on the left side in the schemas, you see that it's not showing up those things that you had just executed or added. So what I'm going to do is this little refresh icon, hit on that, and then right next you can see these things show up, which is perfect. So we have all our tables, and if you click on one of the tables, you can actually right click on one of the tables and then just say select rows, okay, and limit 1000, show the first 1000 rows. So if you do that, it'll show up like something like this, and it just means that your script worked perfectly and everything is installed. All right, so that's the end of this part. Okay, so in that previous demo, you saw when we were inputting the password, you had the option to actually add that to the vault so that you're not prompted every time. So you can do that, and then again you can go back to the connection tab and then clear the password as well, as pointed out in these steps. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Here again, this shows how you can start or stop a server. This screenshot here demonstrates how it looks when the server is stopped. Again, you have to go into the instance and then click on the startup/shutdown tab. How to stop and start the database server. Again, the steps I just mentioned and demonstrated are listed here. The tables available for the AP database. We briefly took a look at some of the tables for the AP database, and this is you can just go on the left side under schemas and then select the schema that you're looking for, and then underneath you can see the tables. Yeah, and here are all the various tables under the AP database. You can see the vendors table, if we were talking about that before, invoices table, etc. All right, so when you right click on a table and say select the first 1000 rows, what happens is a query is generated automatically, something similar to this: select star, which means everything, from AP, which is the schema, dot invoices, which is the table name, and then semicolon to end the statement, and that is automatically generated and then executed as well. And that results the result of that execution is displayed under the result grid. So this is how you can view the data for a table. But you can also use these buttons here, the edit buttons, to add a row or delete a row, or modify some contents of a row. So you can play around with these buttons to achieve some sort of a ability to modify your database. Okay, now I should say that this is really not the way most of the times database administrators are going to be interacting with the database. Like 99.99%, more than that percentage times, it's mostly just going to be using some sort of a command. But there is a way that MySQL Workbench allows you to kind of interact with it graphically, which kind of might help you understand it conceptually. Okay. In this slide, it just points out the same things that I just mentioned. How do you view the data? So right click on the table and select the select row limit 1000 command to display the result grid. And then if you want to edit it, you just have to go and the buttons that I pointed out earlier, go to insert, update, or delete rows, and then you just at the bottom there is an apply button that you press to make the changes permanent. All right. So here, so this is the column definitions for the vendor tables. The way you find this part is if you right click on a vendors table, or any table for that matter, and then say alter table, it will give you a view like this. And what you're seeing here is the name of the table, but you also are seeing the various columns that exist in the table. So we have a whole bunch of columns. You're also seeing the data type, and if this is a primary key or not, if it is a null allowed or not. If this double N stands for not null, UQ stands for unique, and um, and a few others. We won't get into that. There is auto increment, which is checked here. Okay, so these are the various columns that are present. You could actually change some of these columns type and properties depending, like just by using your mouse. But again, this is not the way we mostly do this. We learn how to do it using command line, and that's the main way. All right, moving on. So these steps are the ones that I just described. Okay, here's an example of a select statement and its result. So we will take a good look at select statements in the next chapters, but here's a simple example and I'll describe what is going on here. So we see this statement here. Okay, this is actually just the one statement, even though it is in 3 lines, but it's actually just one SQL command or query. So we're saying select vendor name, vendor city, and vendor state from vendors ordered by vendor name. So what we are saying is that I want the 3 columns, these 3 columns from the vendors table, and I want it ordered by vendor name, so sort by vendor name. So here when this query is executed, and to execute the query you will have to click this lightning bolt little button here. If you just click on that button, it will execute this query, and what you will see is the name of the vendors, the city, and the state. I would encourage you to go ahead and give this a try. Just even if you just copied this and typed it out in your MySQL Workbench and executed it, you should see something similar, and that will kind of be you can run queries like this. Okay, all right. And here are the steps to actually running the query. So press Ctrl T or click the create new SQL tab button in the SQL editor toolbar to open a new code editor tab. Once you have the new tab, you can double click a database in the schemas tab of the navigator window to select it. Type the SQL statement into the SQL editor. Okay, so you just type the SQL statement in the editor, and then to execute, you could either press Ctrl Enter or click the execute current statement button. Okay, if the statement retrieves data, the data is displayed in a result grid. Okay, so those are the steps of how you would open a new SQL tab, write some SQL statements in it, execute it, and see the results. Next, let's talk about SQL code snippets. Okay, now there is a library of SQL syntax that comes with the MySQL Workbench, and they are called snippets, and they are also categorized into sections. So, and these kind of snippets allow you to do various things like manage the database, define objects, or manipulate the data, etc. You can create your own snippets as well, and in fact that is often the more popular way to use this feature. So to take a look at snippets, what you should do is if it's not already showing, you will see that there is this little right panel thing here. When you click on that, the right panel should show up, right? This blue little thing on the right, where I'm pointing my pointer here. Once that shows up, this right side panel, at the bottom you should have a snippet tab. So if you click on that, then you should be able to see all the snippets. And then here you see this is a drop down button. So if you click on that, it will show you you can select between your own saved snippets or the ones that come with the MySQL Workbench, the predefined ones. You can select the snippets category basically. So and then once you have a snippet, you can just right click on the snippet itself and then hit enter, insert into, and that will place the snippet code inside your SQL, like the editor. Okay. Now, how do you use the snippet? As I said, you navigate to the snippet that you want, and then simply insert the snippet. And then if you need to, you can actually edit the snippet code, right? And oftentimes you would have to do that. Say there's a snippet to create a new table. Okay, so you obviously would have to actually change the name of the table and any of the columns that exist already in the template, right? Similarly, you can, so you select the code, select the snippet you want to replace the code with, and then click the replace current text button. So you can also update an existing snippet. This is the way you do that. These are the 3 steps. I'm not showing all this because this is quite intuitive. Actually, just give it a try. It should be pretty simple. Yeah, how to enter your own snippet. Enter the code for the snippet into a SQL editor tab. So you basically write your code down in the editor, and then select the category where you want to save the snippet. So on the right side, you just go and select the category from the drop down, and then click the save snippet button in the SQL editor tab, toolbar, and enter a name for the snippet. Okay, so you just save the snippet that way, and you can also delete the snippets by following these 2 steps. Now, I'm not doing a lot of demos because, to be frank, I don't really see a lot of use for snippets. I'm sure there are cases that can be useful when you're doing repetitive tasks, but the snippets that come built in with MySQL Workbench are huge. Like, they're very comprehensive. Okay, it will have all kinds of different options in it, so it can be a little more confusing sometimes. Okay, for especially when you're just starting off. But it's good to know that the feature is there. Later on, when you need it to, doing repetitive tasks, you can just create a little script almost and save it in the snippets category. And you can maybe share it with your colleagues who are working on the part of a team. So you can have a little library of different SQL scripts that you are running on a regular basis. So I can see in such situations that this will be very useful. Okay, but in our course, I don't really see a lot of use for this particular thing for now. Okay, all right, moving on. Next, let's talk about syntax errors. If your syntax if the code that you're entering has any sort of unexpected syntax, MySQL Workbench is going to not be able to execute that code properly. Now, here's an example of a syntax error. You can see that on the left side here, the name of the table is vendors, but if you notice, the typo is that they have specified vendor rather than the plural vendors in the code. So that is going to lead to a syntax error, and MySQL Workbench tries to help you out by showing you or trying to point out what was the problem. So here it says table ap.vendor doesn't exist. So that should give you a hint that, okay, let's take a look. Does it really exist or not? And then you say, oh, okay, so I have a typo there. And in fact, that is one of the most common causes of the syntax error. Okay. Some of the common causes of syntax error are these ones. Having the wrong database selected. Okay, so if you forget to select the database with the help of the use command, it will come back and say that, hey, the database doesn't exist or the table doesn't exist. Misspelling the name of a table or a column, that is again a common mistake. Misspelling a keyword, if you spell it wrong or something like that, then it will also not work. And omitting the closing quotation mark for a string character. When you are using strings in your SQL syntax, strings are literal text values. If you're specifying a literal value like that, you also need to close and end, open and close with quotation marks. And if you don't do that correctly, it will again come back and say there's an error. All right, let's talk about SQL scripts next. A SQL script is a file that contains one or more SQL statements. Okay, it's a simple text file. It doesn't contain any special formatting. Like okay, it doesn't contain any bold or italics or underline or fonts or anything like that. So you cannot use Microsoft Word, for example, to create your SQL script file. You can use a simple text editor like a Notepad or some other programming IDE to do it. Or in my suggestion, and for this particular course, you can just use MySQL Workbench. So if you're on MySQL Workbench, let's first see how do you open a script file, and then we'll talk about how do you create your own. Okay, so if you want to just try and open a script file, so what you do is you go to File, Open SQL Script, and then it will open up this sort of a dialog box, and you select the script that you want to run and just hit select the file and hit open. It's really straightforward. Actually, I'm sure you guys will not have any trouble with it. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Here's just the steps listed. So how to open script file, I kind of went over that. And you may have a whole bunch of script files open as well on your MySQL Workbench window, and you can easily switch between those script files. They show up as maybe browser tabs on your web browser, so very similar. How to cut, copy, and paste code? You can use standard techniques, so it allows you to cut from one script file, paste it in the other, and vice versa. To save a SQL statement to a script file or multiple SQL statements, whatever, click the Save button in the SQL Editor toolbar, or you can even just press Ctrl S. If you do that, it will come back and say where do you want to save it and what do you want to call the script file. Specify those details and you're good. How to save a modified script to a new file? You have the option to also save script as, which allows you to create a new script file. So pretty simple and intuitive methods here, steps. Here's an example of an SQL script and its result. The user has opened up an SQL script file using the methods earlier described, and then they have executed the script file, probably using this lightning bolt icon. If you click on this lightning bolt icon, all the SQL commands in your script file will just be executed, which is perfect. Then it also shows if there is any output in the output section. If there are errors, it will come back with a red. If there are some warnings, it'll be yellow. And if it's all good, then it'll be green. And then here are the results displayed from the last execution. Okay. This slide specifies some keyboard shortcuts to make your life easier if you want to run the entire script. You can hit Ctrl Shift plus Enter to run the whole script, or if you want to just run only part of the script, like a specific statement, you can move the insertion point into the statement that you want to execute. So basically click on the statement and then press the Ctrl plus Enter keys, or click the Execute Current Statement button. So that will only execute that one statement. Okay. How to run two or more statements in a script? Select the statement you want to execute statements, and then press the Ctrl plus Shift plus Enter keys, or click the Execute SQL script button. So this is a way you can select part of the script. The results of each statement that returns data are displayed in a separate result grid. Okay, if a script contains more than one statement, you must code a semicolon at the end of each statement. So this is actually really important. If you have multiple statements in your script, you must place semicolons at the end of the statements. Okay, if you have only one statement, though, the semicolon is not required, it's optional. So that's something to remember. Okay, and here also this is also an important point here, that if you have multiple statements that returns data, they will be displayed in separate result grids. The next slide tells you about the MySQL reference manual. So the reference manual of MySQL is a huge this documentation of all the different functions and operations and language structure. There also contains tutorials and anything that you can imagine connected to MySQL. It's in there in this documentation. Okay, the link to the MySQL reference manual is right here, so you can go to that website and take a look for yourself. Okay. This slide shows a sample page from the MySQL reference manual. You can see that on the left side there's all this that index, and you can there's a search bar up here as well. You can specify your phrase that you're looking for, any syntax or anything like that, and then hit the search icon to search through the entire manual. This is a huge document, so you know this is going to be very useful. The manual also contains a whole bunch of features, like it has tutorials as well. It has get started guide. There's all these kinds of, it's like there's information about optimization, backup and security, data types, functions and operators. So anything that you can imagine you may need to know about MySQL, you'll find it in this manual. This is a very comprehensive manual. Next, let's talk a little bit about the MySQL command line client in Windows. So before MySQL Workbench was available, programmers used a command line tool called the MySQL command line client to connect to a MySQL server and work with it. This tool is also known as the MySQL command line. Although you may never use this tool for this course and in the future probably, you should at least be aware of that this exists. Sometimes, if you do not have the MySQL Workbench installed on a machine, you can use this tool to get your work done. It takes all the commands, the same commands that you're going to be learning in this course. So the only difference between MySQL Workbench and this one is that Workbench has a graphical user interface, so it allows for displaying the tables maybe in a different fashion than it is possible just with the help of the command line. But I know many people who actually prefer this method, this command line method, than the graphical user interface. To open the MySQL command line, you can open it by clicking on Start, All Programs, and MySQL Server 8.0, and then this MySQL 8.0 command line client. You can probably just search for MySQL 8.0 command line client on your search bar, and that should also point to the same program. And then how to start the MySQL command line client from the Windows command prompt. So if you want to start from the command prompt, you can follow this process. So you just cd or change directory to this particular location, which is the binary bin folder in the MySQL server. And then you just say MySQL-u, which allows you to specify the username, and then -b, which is basically saying it's going to need the password, so make sure you ask for the password. So basically you enter these two commands, and then it will prompt for the password, and then just enter the password and you're in, and you should see the MySQL that cursor, that greater than symbol, and then you can just start typing your commands. Next, in this one here is the MySQL command line client from a Mac OS, which is great. Mac's terminal is really strong. So you just say cd, again, go to the directory that's installed, and then if you're familiar with Mac OS or Unix or Linux operating systems, you can run a program with like this. So /MySQL, and again the same thing as Windows -u root -p. Okay, sweet. This slide shows the complete syntax of the MySQL command. The MySQL command allows you to specify the host name and the username, and the fact that you're going to enter a password in the next line. So that's the -b. Some examples here, in the first example, it shows just the username and the password. In the next example, it shows the root user with the local host. So this is probably what you may have to use if you are going to use it. And then the last one is a remote server. So Murach.com is a remote host name. Again, remember the network can be the internet, right? So in our examples, like the ones that we have seen so far, it was all localhost. But in this example, this is a remote server. And then you can use -u, which is the username. And then the password will be, it will ask for the password in the next line if you do -p. And but then again, if you're just using the MySQL client from the Windows Start menu, as I showed in the last slide, then it will directly prompt you for the password. It will not ask for like all this all the username. You don't have to do all this stuff. You can just directly enter the password and log right in. If you want to exit the shell or the command line, you just use the exit with the semicolon command and hit enter, and it should bump you out of there. Next slide. So once you're in, you can write commands, simple commands like this, show databases, for example, with semicolon, and it will list and output the databases in this sort of a format. You can see all the various schemas or databases present in the DBMS system. Okay. Some more example of the use of the MySQL command line interface. Here on the prompt, if you say use AP, it will change the database to AP. Next, if you do a select statement like this, it will display the output in a command line sort of way. It's the same information but displayed on command line. So what it can do, the command line can do, is obviously restricted by the graphical capabilities. You can't really scroll with your mouse or do things like that. But yeah, it works. It works really well. So that's actually the end of this chapter. And in this chapter, we saw how to use MySQL Workbench to start and stop a MySQL server and to enter and execute SQL statements. You also looked at the SQL scripts that can be executed or saved. We also talked about snippets. Now you're ready to go on to the next chapter, where you'll start learning the details of coding your own SQL statements. Thank you very much.